Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a medical mystery, one that unfolds not in an operating room, but inside the lab.
All right, let's jump right into a situation that's, well, kind of a head-scratcher for doctors. Imagine this. During a colonoscopy, a doctor spots something suspicious. They're sure it's a problem. But then, the official lab report comes back and says the complete opposite. Who do you trust? So, picture this. A doctor is performing a colonoscopy, and they find a tiny precancerous polyp. They remove it, send it off to pathology for analysis, but then the report comes back, and it says normal tissue. Now, you might think this is some super rare, one-off thing, but it's not. It's actually a well-known puzzle in colorectal cancer screening, especially when we're talking about these really small polyps. So, yeah, what is going on here? How can the doctor's camera and the pathologist's microscope be telling two completely different stories?
Okay, so on one hand, you've got the endoscopist. That's the doctor performing the procedure. They're making a judgment call right there, in real time, based on what they see. On the other hand, you have the lab analysis, which we usually think of as the final word, right? So when these two clash, you've got a real problem, a serious diagnostic disagreement.
So how do we get to the bottom of this? Well, a team of researchers in Japan decided to tackle this exact problem, and they designed a really clever study to figure out what's actually happening.
What they did was look at almost 1,000 of these tiny polyps, all ones that experienced doctors had said, hey, this looks precancerous. But the researchers got really specific. They focused in on the 143 cases that were the real head scratchers. The ones where the doctor was concerned, but the lab said, nope, nothing to see here.
Okay, to really get what might be going wrong, we need to look at how this stuff is usually handled in the lab. They take the polyp, they embed it in a block of wax, and then a machine called a microtome shaves off this incredibly thin slice, we're talking just 3 microns thick, for the pathologist to look at under a microscope. But here's the key question. What if that one single slice misses the important part? There's actually a great way to visualize this. It's called the muffin analogy. Think of the precancerous part of the polyp as one tiny chocolate chip in a big muffin. Now, if you take just one slice of that muffin and you happen to miss the chocolate chip, what do you see? Just plain muffin. You'd completely miss the evidence that a chip was ever there.
So the researchers had this really simple but brilliant idea. They thought, hey, what if we just go back to the original muffin, that wax block, and take a few more slices from the same spot? It's a technique called additional sectioning.
All right, so did it work? Did taking a second look actually pay off? Let's find out. This was it, the big question. For those 143 samples that the lab initially called normal, would taking more slices finally reveal what the doctors were so sure they saw?
And the results were pretty stunning. Get this, after taking those extra slices, 34 of those 143 normal polyps were re-diagnosed as precancerous. 34. It turns out the chocolate chip was in the muffin the whole time.
To put a number on it, that's 23.8%. That means almost 1 out of every 4 of those normal diagnoses was actually incorrect. The doctor was right, but the standard first slice procedure just missed it.
So yeah, just by taking a few extra slices of tissue, they corrected the diagnosis in almost a quarter of these cases. It proves that doctors' eyes weren't playing tricks on them. The standard lab procedure was just, well, not thorough enough, and it was missing things it shouldn't have been.
But the researchers didn't stop there. They wanted to know if there was some kind of clue, some telltale sign that could predict when the lab was most likely to get it wrong.
And it turns out, the biggest clue was something they called a high-confidence diagnosis. Basically, this is when the endoscopist, using these really specific visual cues from their camera, things like color, surface pattern, is almost certain that what they're looking at is a precancerous adenoma.
And check this out. That confidence level was a huge predictor. Of the polyps that got re-diagnosed as precancerous, nearly 65% of them had been flagged with high confidence by the doctor from the start. Compare that to the ones that stayed normal. It shows that when the doctor has that high degree of certainty, that gut feeling backed by experience, it really means something.
Okay, so at this point you might be thinking, these are tiny polyps. Why does all this matter so much?
Well, the answer is actually critical to your long-term health. Because what they find during your colonoscopy, especially the number and type of polyps, is exactly what determines your future screening schedule. It decides how soon you need to come back.
Here's how it works. The guidelines are pretty specific. If you have, say, 3 or more of these precancerous adenomas, or even just one with certain high-risk features, you're supposed to get a follow-up screening in just 3 years. But if the lab misses one of those, you could get wrongly placed into a low-risk category.
And that could push your next vital screening back by 5 or even 10 years. That's a huge deal.
And this all leads to the study's really powerful conclusion. The quote here from the researchers is a bit academic, but here's the bottom line. When we're talking about these tiny polyps, and an experienced doctor says with high confidence that it's an adenoma, we probably shouldn't just dismiss that because of a single lab slice. In fact, in these situations, the doctor's experienced eye might actually be the gold standard.
So it leaves us with this really interesting question, right? In an age of all this high-tech lab equipment, could a doctor's experienced eye actually be the ultimate tiebreaker? It seems that when it comes to solving the case of the missing polyp, it's that blend of human expertise and just being willing to take a second look that really makes all the difference.